Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume, and it is Tuesday, October 3rd, in the year of our Lord, 2023. Well, back in 2015, Sandra Merritt and David Daleiden released videos exposing Planned Parenthood's illegal trade in aborted baby body parts. The videos were part of a 30-month undercover journalistic operation, and they showed Planned Parenthood executives haggling over prices of aborted baby parts and discussing how they change abortion procedures to obtain more intact organs. And because of her pro-life work, Sandra Merritt was hit with both criminal and civil charges. In the civil lawsuit, Planned Parenthood is seeking millions of dollars from Sandra because of her work in exposing the abortion provider. A Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Sandra, and she appealed her case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, yesterday, the Supreme Court denied a request to review the case. And unless something changes, it appears Sandra will be on the hook for $16 million payable to Planned Parenthood for her undercover work against the iniquitous abortion giant. Liberty Counsel is a Christian ministry that was founded in 1989, and they are defending Sandra against the vicious two-front attack launched against her by California's Attorney General and Planned Parenthood. I'm joined on the phone now by Liberty Counsel's Vice President of Legal Affairs and Chief Litigation Counsel, Harry Mihet. Harry, thanks so much for joining me today. And did I miss anything essential there in the background of this case?
It's great to be with you, Chris. No, I think you've got it just about right. This is where we are today, and a grave injustice has taken place here with respect to Sandra and Planned Parenthood and what they've done to her, and now the Supreme Court having declined to take up her case.
Well, just to give a little bit more background for those who aren't familiar with this, the videos that they released, a bit of a scathing rebuke against Planned Parenthood. What sort of information did they reveal that would have Planned Parenthood going after Sandra?
You know, to borrow a phrase that my young teenagers would say, Planned Parenthood was caught in 4K. Sandra and David Daleiden, they went undercover for almost 3 years. They pretended to be engaged in the illegal trade for body parts, and they found an open market out there, an underground market for it, where Planned Parenthood was supplying these kinds of fetal tissue. They call it innocuously, but the baby body parts, no less, to researchers and others for a profit. That is flatly against the law. And so there was evidence, video evidence, unmistakable evidence that was gathered, and of Planned Parenthood, the doctors that were willing to change abortion procedures in order to harvest as intact organs as possible to maximize their value. And so you would think that with this kind of evidence, the authorities would have gone after Planned Parenthood to shut it down, to shut down this illegal trade. But instead, it has been Sandra and David that have found themselves on the wrong side of the law because Planned Parenthood has appealed to its political allies that it has financed and now have come to its rescue. And so somehow it has turned the tables and made David and Sandra look like the ones who broke the law, when in fact it's completely the other way around.
Yeah, clear case, like Isaiah said, of calling good evil and evil good. So Harry, there's no cases against Planned Parenthood from this video evidence at this point.
Well, not at this point. So there was, fortunately, that there were other people that were engaged in this illegal trade that have been prosecuted and shut down. For example, the Orange County District Attorney down in Southern California was able to use the evidence that David and Sandra gathered and to go after an entity down there that was engaged in that trade. And they fined it, I believe, close to $8 million. And that was enough to make them close their doors permanently. And so that's the kind of result that should have been obtained against Planned Parenthood and others. But Planned Parenthood is so well politically connected, and we're talking about the Attorney General of the state of California at the time was Kamala Harris. After her came in Javier Becerra, and both of them were quite literally on Planned Parenthood's payroll in terms of campaign donations. And so they decided to start prosecution action against Sandra and David for supposedly, filming confidential communications without consent. And the very notion that these are confidential communications is a complete farce, and it's ludicrous and preposterous, because these were communications that were filmed in crowded restaurants, in crowded hotel lobbies, where they could clearly be overheard by others, and that's the very definition of what is not a confidential communication. So, meritless and frivolous charges that were brought against Sandra and David in a criminal case, and then at the same time, Planned Parenthood filed a civil suit in federal court against them and others. And it succeeded in having a California jury, a San Francisco jury, awarded several millions of dollars in damages for supposed breaches of privacy, and then attorney's fees on top of that, bringing their total exposure to, I think, over $16 million at this point.
Now, is that $16 million just for Sandra, or does that include other people?
That is jointly and severally imposed on a number of defendants. And so what that means is that Planned Parenthood could choose who to try to collect from. It could try to collect all of the money from one defendant, or some of the money from one defendant and some from others. Sandra is legally on the hook for the entire 16.
Okay. Now, talking a little bit more about this civil case, I mean, this is a case where the work that Sandra and David were doing, I mean, this was journalism. Yeah, what journalism should be doing, exposing the darkness. And just walk us through a little bit of how Planned Parenthood is doing in the civil case in this jury in San Francisco, saying, well, yeah, you know what? People shouldn't have the right to do this.
Well, and it's not just Sandra and David. I mean, this is undercover journalism. There's a very rich tradition in this country of, the 2020 or 48 hours or Inside Edition or a whole host of other journalistic outlets that go undercover and they expose, cruelty to animals or unsanitary conditions at meat plants or, child sex trade. I mean, all kinds of evil has been exposed through undercover reporting. And that only makes sense because if the criminals know that you have a camera on, they're not going to admit to criminality, to illegal behavior, right? So that's been the whole notion behind undercover reporting, and there's been a rich tradition in this country. Never before, have the undercover reporters themselves become the targets of the law. But now, because we're dealing with abortion and well-funded, abortion giants, they've been able to turn the tables and essentially to criminalize undercover reporting. And if the result that was obtained here stands, then ABC and CBS and any other journalistic enterprise will certainly be chilled and have to think twice before they engage in the same kind of undercover tactics. Because if Sandra and David can be tagged with multi-million-dollar judgments, then everyone else is at risk too. So it's a real shame and a real setback for undercover journalism in this country, unfortunately.
Yeah, and when you think about, of course, the selective enforcement, the work that they're doing to expose Planned Parenthood, it's Planned Parenthood and abortion has become something of a golden calf in our society. You touch that, and you're touching holy things in the pagan mind.
Exactly, and there's no question in my mind and in anybody who's paying attention mind that if Sandra and David had uncovered cruelty to baby whales or the illegal trading in poached animals, we would not be here. They would have never been prosecuted, and the criminals would have been laughed out of court if they had tried to mount a counterattack, lawfare against them. But again, there's some have noticed or have said in this country that there is law and there is abortion law, unfortunately, and there's such a disparity and a disconnect between the two, and it's just boggles the mind. It's very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's very troubling. Now, let's talk a little bit about I know you can't speak to exactly why they rejected this. From my understanding, the Supreme Court did not even comment on their, rejection, so to speak. They're not going to hear this case. I mean, when you mention, something like this is very unheard of. I mean, you would think if it goes to the Supreme Court, they're big into precedent, historical precedents. Has there been another case of this where undercover journalists, had to pay money because of what they did? Do you have any thoughts on the Supreme Court not hearing this?
Yeah, so it is impossible to tell because the Supreme Court doesn't give us a reason. What we do know is that the Supreme Court takes only a very, very small fraction, less than 1% of the petitions that come before it, asking it to review a lower court decision, are actually accepted. So the odds were stacked against us from the very beginning, and then the Supreme Court oftentimes will turn down a case, many, many times before it actually accepts it. Case in point, for example, the Dobbs decision that finally overturned Roe v. Wade. We lost count how many opportunities the court had before it actually, took the Dobbs case to overturn Roe v. Wade, and for 50 years it declined to do so. And so, just because they did not accept this case does not mean that they consider the result a good one, or that they consider Sandra and David to be wrong and Planned Parenthood to be right. They could very well someday on a similar case with similar facts decide to get involved and to right this wrong, and I hope that they do for the sake of undercover journalism. But in terms of why they chose not to do it here, it's going to remain a mystery. Unfortunately, we don't know, and I'm not sure that we will ever know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you see there's a bunch of issues under the surface here from a biblical worldview and man's law versus God's law. But from the American historical perspective, you would think a case like this would be very, very important. I mean, I listen to some of these Supreme Court cases, and I'm just like, this is what we're arguing at the highest level, and then something like this gets rejected. It's obviously very concerning. I know it's concerning to you and the folks at Liberty Counsel, and to Sandra as well, that something like this would not be considered. Now, is there any, so as far as Sandra goes, though, I mean, there's no other recourse for this civil lawsuit, is that correct?
Right. I mean, the Supreme Court having rejected it, it's likely at the end of the road. I mean, there are some other additional procedural things that can and will happen here, and so it's never too late for a miracle, and I think God can still intervene if He chooses to do so. But as of right now, the civil case is largely settled. The decision, having been made below, and now the Supreme Court is not getting involved. So, fairly soon in the next few weeks, Planned Parenthood will be able to start trying to collect on its $16 million judgment.
Okay. Now, will Liberty Counsel provide any information on that and how people can help? I mean, obviously we can pray for Sandra, but will there be any other ways people can help her?
Yes, I mean, Sandra is in a good position, and I believe that the Lord is going to care for her and provide for her. I think if people pray for her and she knows that people are praying for her and she receives strength from that, and I think that's the biggest thing that people can do for her right now.
Okay. And can you provide any updates on the criminal case against Sandra?
Yeah. So, the criminal case, too, has been going on for 7-8 years now. And it's scheduled for trial in San Francisco for a jury trial this November. But there are some things happening there as well that may result in it being postponed again. We're filing some motions even this week to try to have the court dismiss those charges on the basis that the recording statute in California is unconstitutional. We're aided by the fact that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal appeals court in California, one of the most liberal ones in the nation, has just within the last month invalidated a very similar law from Oregon, the neighboring state, that also purported to criminalize the unauthorized or unconsented recording of communications that take place in a public space. And the Ninth Circuit said that that was in violation of the First Amendment, and it invalidated that law. Well, it's the same exact principle and then almost the same exact law in California, and under the same rationale, California's law should be thrown out. So we're raising that issue now with the state court where the criminal case is pending, and we'll see how that plays out. But as of right now, the trial is scheduled for November, and the California Attorney General, who is prosecuting the case, is looking to jail Sandra and David for as long as a decade, which is just unconscionable. So we will continue to defend her, and we will pray for justice to be served in the criminal case.
Amen. Now, that case, could that be appealed to the Supreme Court?
It could. It can. If there is a conviction, we will run through the chains of appeal, and perhaps the Supreme Court would be more interested in a case where actual liberty is being threatened, not merely the wallet.
Yeah, and we would hope they would be concerned with both. But Harry, I appreciate it very, very much. Anything else you'd like to add here for our listeners who may be just hearing about this and your work there at Liberty Counsel? Anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Well, again, we appreciate the prayerful support of your listeners, because we're engaged in a spiritual battle first and foremost against the forces of darkness, and we need God's people to carry us through in their prayers, to remember us. I would encourage your listeners to visit us online at lc.org. That's LC as in libertycounsel.org, where we have more information about this case and a host of other cases like this that we are engaged in every day to try to preserve constitutional freedoms for freedom-loving people and people of faith in this country. And I'd remind your listeners that we do all of our work pro bono. We are a donor-funded, nonprofit Christian ministry. And so if some of your listeners would be interested in partnering with us to help us further this work and this mission, we would welcome them to do that, and they would find more information about that as well at lc.org.
All right. Well, thank you, Harry. Yes, go over to lc.org, get more information on Liberty Counsel, and you can read. There's a bunch of press releases on Sandra's case as well, so you can know how to pray for her. Well, Harry, thank you so much for your time again. Harry Mihet, Liberty Counsel's Vice President of Legal Affairs and Chief Litigation Counsel. Harry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris. Have a blessed day.
Remember to pray for Sandra Merritt and David Daleiden as they face prosecution and really persecution for their efforts to expose the evil practices of Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. For more information about the Lancaster Patriot, go to thelancasterpatriot.com. If you'd like to support our show, go to patreon.com/The Lancaster Patriot and become a patron today. That does it for today. Until next time, remember, even in the midst of injustice, that Christ, not man, is king. So long.